Well, one of the other topics which I think kind of comes along here, which has been, I've seen kind of a shift recently in the past couple of years, and we've done a lot on it here. In the magazine, Gary wrote an article on his article was on the 10 kings, and he's saying, hey, people are looking for the Antichrist, who he is, he said, but we know that the 10 kings are there prior to him, so we should be looking for the 10 kings, okay, in that sense. And so then I wrote a follow-up article, and I know that it causes, it challenges tradition, and let's not make a mistake.
Yeah,
I know that
step on toes that way.
Here, even in the prophecy world, the dispensational world, we're dispensational, we make a distinction between the church and Israel. But people, you start messing with some of these sacred cows, and people get irritated. And
well, how do you see the 10 kings? Because some interpret it that the revived Roman Empire, the Europe will break into 10,
what is
or the
typical,
world 10 kings.
Give us the typical, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. But what is the typical traditional interpretation?
I think the traditional view was that Europe would divide into 10 regions. They saw the European Union rise. It's got 27 Finland
now.
just joined. So now it's growing.
Brexit, so now you reduce it.
Yeah, it comes and goes.
Just over 30 in NATO as a comparison.
Yep.
So
that's a good point. So the idea is, okay, well, those will divide into 10, and then the Antichrist will be the little horn who will rise up, subdue 3, and take over.
Yeah.
But when you read in the end of book of Revelation, where the Antichrist empire is falling apart, and he goes against the king of the south to put down a rebellion, but the kings of the east are coming, all of a sudden it seems like, well, why would you divide Europe into 10 regions? You can go to the UN and see, even back in the 50s, they had the world mapped into 10 regions.
Yeah, they still do, yeah.
And so I think the traditional view, to answer your question, is it's a European Union division of 10, but I think biblically, and it's getting more popular now, is that the world is divided into 10 regions.
And I remember watching back in the 90s, Jack Van Impe.
Yeah.
And so back then it was, there were 10 nations in the European Union, and then it went, so then it was like, okay, everybody, here's 10, and then minus 3 because he's got to take down 3, and there's 7 left, and here we are. Well, then it went to 13, and he's like, okay, I got to change my view on this. So he's like, oh, well, now we know. See, there's 13, and they take away 3, and now we're going to be back at 10. So, and he's trying his best, to understand it from the European. But then it went to 18, 20, and he's like, okay, I guess.
That's a Eurocentric perspective.
Yes, it is.
Yes. And Nathan made the point over the weekend. People always ask, well, where's American Bible prophecy? And he said, and he's right, when we go to speak elsewhere, nobody says, well, where's Canada in Bible prophecy? Where's Mexico in Bible prophecy?
Yeah.
They don't ask that question. We are so self-absorbed
we are.
in the West that we think everything revolves around us. And the truth is, the Lord's throne is not draped in an American flag, and he is looking at the whole globe. And so there are whole other sectors of the world population that I think will play into the end times. And so this 10 king coalition doesn't just have to come from Europe. I think that is a traditional view because that was where power was consolidated for so long. But right now, the world power is shifting. It's shifting east. And so not just to China. China is actually this month going to fall from prominence as the most populous nation in the world. Y'all know that. It's going to be India.
Okay.
And so India is rising, and there are other parts of the world that will continue to have great prominence even into the end times, probably as the United States decreases in prominence. So I agree with Nathan. I'm not sure that it will be this European coalition, even though that's where the Antichrist will come from.
Because we do know that there's a worldwide, Revelation 13 is worldwide. All nations, tongues, we know that. So my thinking when I wrote my article was...
because you're going to take it a different direction.
Yeah,
I read that article.
I was like, okay, you have the Europe model, you have the UN model, the 10 regions, and I thought, well, okay, it could be. I'm not saying that that's absolutely wrong. But when you look at Revelation 17:12, and it talks about that these are people, these are kings. It says, use the word king. We mentioned this earlier.
Yeah, which means rulers.
Basileus. Right? It can mean an actual guy that's in an official position. Or it can mean somebody that has just, the way that the lexicon reads is transcendent power, transcendent influence. And so as I was thinking through it, I'm like, okay, if we look around, like here's the test question, which I think helps substantiate to people's thinking. Right now, we look, okay, who's the number one superpower in the world? U.S. probably,
the
right?
US is still,
we're waning, but we're still, we're still there.
We're bigger than the next 10 after us.
Yeah, so we say maybe, we're number one, China, Russia still, maybe Europe as a nation, but let's just do single. So right now, here's my question. On the International Space Station, there's a leak. There has been a leak, but let's say it was a major leak. All of a sudden, boom, we need to be rescued within a week. This is it. Oxygen's gone. What would NASA do?
Go. Oh yeah, they'd go to Elon Musk.
They'd go to Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Here you have, think about this.
And all the other rockets have been blowing up lately.
Right. You have the world's superpower would go to a private individual.
True.
And say, can you help us? And he would say, now maybe, well, I don't know him, maybe he'd be magnanimous and be like, oh, of course. But he might say, hey, I need 40,000. I have plans for 40,000 of my rockets or my satellites to go up from the FCC. You've only approved 12,000. Yeah. I'll be happy to help.
Yeah, let's make a deal.
Let's make a deal. Yeah. So when you think about that, and that's what kind of struck me, is you look at what his technological advances are doing. And then you mentioned before, we were talking in China, there's a whole bunch of things going on in China. But these figures, what it says in Revelation 17 is that the Antichrist will go to these 10 figures. I call them influencers. Mm-hmm. And technocrats, oligarchs, so whatever you want to call. And he makes a deal with them. And so he gives them a right to rule for that 1 hour period, which is not just 60 minutes. He comes in and he says, hey, let's come together. I'll give you the right to rule with me. But he's looking for something. So in my fictional narrative, he goes to these 10 guys and says, okay, Elon, I want your 50,000 satellites that you have now, which who knows when it'll be, because I need to surveil everything. I want to use, basically he says, I want your guys' technology, but I'll give you the right to rule. Because you think about what these guys have and what they don't have. So I look at it as a theory, as a possibility that what maybe has been missing is the opportunity for these 10 guys to be extremely wealthy, technologically advanced, to come and powerful, to offer him something, the Antichrist, something.
It's kind of like a mafia mindset that the head boss makes them an offer they can't refuse, but in the process of giving power to those 10, he is actually consolidating his own rule and authority.
Yes.
And I can see that as well. A lot of times, having been in politics, I can tell you that the power brokers are not the elected officials. They are the front people for other powers and other movements and dynamics that are behind the scenes. And some of these guys that are behind the scenes, they don't even want to be seen. And I'm not trying to create a conspiracy mindset, but I'm just saying there are a lot of moving pieces, and sometimes who you see. Well, in our own nation, there are a lot of folks that realize Joe Biden isn't really pulling all the strings in the White House.
How much influence does George Soros have behind the scenes?
At my level, when I was in politics, I never would have heard of his name, except money was beginning to feed toward people like the district attorneys that run and some of the attorney generals at the state level. And that is swaying things dramatically in our nation. And obviously with certain races, again, not in mine, but you can see his fingerprints on a lot of things. So
Newt Gingrich couldn't even say his name on TV without him shutting him off.
Yeah.
I mean, he holds that much power over the media.
And it's because of money. And so these guys that have that kind of money, whether it's the Soros or a Zuckerberg or
Bill Gates,
Elon Musk,
Musk, you name it. That's just the American side.
Exactly.
Think about the Russian or the Chinese side.
And that's why they're trying to take out a lot of these Russian oligarchs, because they're actually power brokers in competition with our power brokers. Yeah. I mean, well, you said Zuckerberg actually had changed the last election with using his, $500 million that he put into canvassing neighborhoods and doing ballot harvesting.
Our own government recognizes that is a belly button, if you will, to be pushed, because when we were trying to push Putin out, quite frankly, they were appealing to some of those oligarchs to take him out. That's what our government was sending signals to do, because they realized the power behind even a despot in Russia is not Vladimir Putin himself. He is, to a degree, the figurehead, but all these guys behind him have a lot more power.
So let's think about that for a second and kind of go a little further. We talk about multinational corporations, wealth. So in reality, governments themselves have the political clout only because of maybe a constitution or a parliament or whatever. But in reality, who controls the narrative? We have technology, we have media, right?
Well, look at Tucker Carlson getting kicked out recently.
Yeah.
And they're trying to slam him. I mean, every article coming out by the media is, he was a terror to work with, or we had to redact his mean tweets and all this crazy stuff. It's like, no, he was exposing everything that was going on.
Yep.
And I love Freedom Tunes. You guys ever watch Freedom Tunes on YouTube? And he has one reason where Tucker gets fired and he's walking down the street all kind of depressed, and he passes this bank of TVs, and it's every news channel out there, and they're saying the exact same thing scripted across channel. And I've always wondered, who is at the top of this pyramid who's making those decisions? Because these media companies are owned by other companies, which are owned by, basically go up to AT&T, and all these mega companies. And we read about how the destruction of Babylon in the end of Revelation, just before the Lord returns, it's destroyed in 1 hour. And who mourns the death of Babylon? The merchants.
Yeah.
And the power brokers, the people who own the companies. As these giant companies gobble up all the companies, and then, we saw during the pandemic, you could go to Amazon, you could go to Walmart, and a handful of others, but everybody else had to close. I think you're onto something there, but I think it might be a mix, because it seems like every politician since maybe George H.W. Bush or even Bill Clinton were openly saying that the presidency was only a step towards the next thing that they wanted, a bigger piece of the pie, and that was UN representation or something bigger.
I'm about to do a program on Dwight David Eisenhower as one of the figures, but I think that he identified what he called the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, exactly.
And now there are other complexes. So there is a medical-industrial complex. We spend more money in the United States on healthcare than any other nation in the world, and our healthcare is actually degrading relative to many other nations who spend half as much. And so it's because we have a medical-industrial complex, mainly with drug companies, and they have tremendous clout across the board with the politicians. And that's just one sector. And so if you can imagine all these other, as you said, technocrats and people with major, major money, that becomes a power in and of itself. And at some point, the tipping point will arrive when they will gain even more control.
Well, how much, Tim, do the lobbyists control? Because it seems like the lobbyists, because you're saying that the politicians are the front men.
But lobbyists are an extension. They're
the representation
of these characters.
Did it seem like every time you were in the Kentucky legislature, some lobbyist wasn't trying to?
There were lobbyists, yes, on certain issues, and they had tremendous clout. And I think it's getting worse in a lot of ways, because whether you look at the embrace of gambling across the nation or marijuana, it's because there's a tremendous and effective lobby. And some people just don't have the grounding to say no. Politicians don't have, I think, a core set of principles. Many of them, they just shift with the winds. And the guys, the handful that do, and it was a minority when I was in the legislature, are very frustrating to those lobbyists, and oftentimes are run against by big money because they don't want someone who stands. And that's what Christians have to do. We need to stand and not be swayed in the winds of whatever is politically expedient at the moment, or what the world is chasing after.
Well, question for you, Mondo, then is, do you think the 10 Kings will happen before or after the rapture? Is it a reorganization of the world before or after? Or do we even know?
I tend to think that we're going to see most of it.
Okay.
I believe, I'm not a real big, the rapture is going to be years and years and years before the tribulation starts. So that gap idea, I think it's more immediate.
Yeah. Especially pulling the restrainer out, it'd be hard to keep a world
Agreed.
together.
Yeah, I don't see it. I know there's a lot of questions. It brings up a lot of other questions about how things fit in, but I still see, based on Luke 17 and others, that when the rescue happens, it's almost immediate. Like Lot was taken out almost exactly before.
I think there'll be a short period, because I think the world will descend into chaos, and it's out of that chaos. Just like I use the example of Nazi Germany in the 30s, the German economy had collapsed. The people were desperate. And one man emerged to say, I can put everything right. And this madman took over a nation that was among the most advanced theologically and technologically, and he drove them to obviously commit World War II. So I see that being a model for what will happen shortly after the rapture.
So as we think about those 10 figures, whether I think about what they call fintech, financial, the technology, the banking, the military, the all that comes to play is extremely influential, and you can't rule the world without it.
No.
And so to be able to have access and to make an agreement to get all of that stuff, I think about what we're seeing even with Elon Musk as an example, his ability he's got over 4,000 satellites now. Again, he's got approval for 12,000, but already he's got over 1 million subscribers to to his internet. So you start looking at that and all these third world countries where it's everywhere, and someone can go, hey, and now they're figuring that some of the new designs of the satellites are two-way, so you can have not just bringing stuff down, but where you can actually surveil.
Oh, sure.
And so here we are. So to be able to see some of that come to play.
Or space-based lasers, that's what I'm
yeah,
interested
we're watching
in.
it.
Yeah. So we know the false prophet can do seeming miracles, including calling fire down from the heavens.
Yeah.
Well, he's a false prophet. He's a charlatan. How's he bringing fire down from heavens? Well, it could be missiles, and they're explaining the flames out the back. But there's been a lot of work in space-based and laser technology, and we're even seeing some countries develop satellite killers, satellites that go around killing other satellites.
That's
so,
been in effect
So if
for
you
a
have
long
those
while.
people, the power brokers that are behind with the money that are able to influence everything, elections, right? You name it, all the way through. Hey,
So-
let's make an agreement.
Well,
Interesting.
I'll give you power. You give me your.
But we all know it's going to be King Charles. He's going to be the Antichrist.